Alright, so Bertrand Russell. Um, Last time Nietzsche proclaimed the death of God. So we had four pro-God folks. We had Nietzsche, who's kind of the most prominent anti-God folk, at least in the world of Western philosophy. Then we get Bertrand Russell, who's going to have very pointed things to say to and at Friedrich Nietzsche. And Bertrand Russell's going to resurrect God, sort of. So we'll see what that means. Russell was probably the most prominent public philosopher, at least of the early 1900s, if not even all the way up until till he died in 1970. Lived to be almost 100 years old. Wrote, as the book tells you in the back, where it gives little brief bios, wrote about any number of topics, primarily analytic philosophy, primarily mathematics and philosophy of math, philosophy of science, things along those lines. But especially later in life, got interested in aesthetics and philosophy of religion stuff as well. He did write a book, Why I Am Not a Christian. It's interesting to point out it's not entitled Why I Am an Atheist. So he's a good Brit of the 1900s, and that'll come out in what he's writing here. Very civilized, very proper, very intellectual. And so for him, at least, there's only two options. There's Christianity and there's atheism, and that's it. Doesn't consider any other options here. So it's interesting to point out, is he an atheist or is he merely an anti-Christian? And that gets even more complicated, as we'll see in the text, and this is the entirety of the text, not an excerpt. Sorry, still trying to adjust the light thing. Gets even more interesting considering, in many ways, what he wants is Christianity without God, whatever that might look like. And so part of his criticism of someone like Nietzsche is, remember, Nietzsche was primarily influenced by biology, right? We're animals first and foremost. We shouldn't be over-intellectualizing when it came to the late 1800s, which is, Nietzsche died in the 1880s. But had he been around to see what happened on the continent of Africa shortly thereafter, when Russell was writing this, the early 1900s, and the colonization of Africa, there were really kind of two main responses. One, yes, let's civilize the savages, and the other, let's go native. So you see that in a lot of art movements of Western art around that time. Still trying to mess with this light, I'm so sorry. It's darker than usual in my basement. Yeah, just ignore all that stuff. Alright, so two completely different responses. Nietzsche would have been hey, embrace the savage, right? The shaman and so on and so forth, closer to nature, closer to this connection with one another. Russell would do no, we need to civilize. Now, his idea of civilized may be very different from what was actually going on the continent of Africa. However, Russell's going to be a fan of civilized. He's going to be more drawn to things like physics, or theoretical physics, astrophysics, much more so than biology. Biology is going to be too concrete, too particular. Russell, the civilized, the intellectual, is going to be more like a Sheldon Cooper, right, from Big Bang Theory. And so Sheldon is, throughout most of the series, kind of poo-pooing Amy Fowler's pursuits in biology, like, oh, that's whatever, you're dealing with monkeys, fine. Nietzsche thinks, yeah, we're kind of like monkeys, whereas Russell thinks, no, we're beyond that, we're better than that. He doesn't think that Nietzsche respects humanity or mankind and the difference that we have with animals enough, and that comes out in the text. So to briefly summarize his Why I'm Not a Christian, then remember, it's Christianity or atheism. Why I'm not a Christian, he says, when it comes to this Jesus fellow, there's three options. Either he was who he said he was the Lord, or he knew he wasn't who he said he was, in which case he's a liar, or he thought he was who he said he was, but he wasn't really, which means he's a lunatic. So Kind of like Pascal's doing his own wager, Russell's doing a wager here too. If I've got 3 options and 2 of those are bad, why would I bother following that fellow? Right? So that's why then Russell is not a Christian, which then, early 1900s, Great Britain, leaves you with atheism instead. But it's interesting it's not entitled Why I Am an Atheist. All right. But this is written about 20 years, 25 years before that book is. This is early Russell. So he's got this Principia Mathematica thing he's writing, this 3-volume opus about logic and about mathematics. And oh yeah, by the way, he's got this 3 or 4 page article about, idealism in a godless universe. And so he starts talking about Dr. Faustus and Mephistopheles and so forth. So let's skip ahead then. Such an outline, but even more purposeless, more void of meaning, is the world which science presents for our belief. Okay, so he's taking science as the case. Look, science is. And so if any religion is going to hope to stand, if any belief is going to hope to stand, it's got to stand on the scaffolding of the truths that science give us. Part of the problem with religion is they're trying to fight against science, as Russell sees it at least. They're trying to fight against science, rather than embracing the truths of science and then building something out of that. So that's, in large part, what Russell's going to try to do here. And so he starts very pessimistically. Like this first paragraph could be Schopenhauer, but then he's going to move beyond that, or at least attempt to. So one open question will be, does Russell succeed in moving beyond this pessimism of the first paragraph on page 792 to any type of optimism and hope? Do we get idealism in all of its flavors, not just ideals like the Platonic ideals, though that's going to be a part here too, but also ideal as in something worth living for, something optimistic and ideal in that sense of the word. Man is the product of causes which had no provision of the end that they were achieving. There's no plan, there's no purpose, there's no intelligent design here, just haphazardly thrown together. Listen to science. That's what they're telling you. His origin, his growth, his hopes, his fears, his loves, his beliefs, the outcome of accidental collections of atoms. No fire, no heroism, no intensity of thought and feeling can preserve an individual life beyond the grave. There is no afterlife. There is no what's next. There is no immortality of the soul. Nietzsche's right about that part. And so is science. Dead is dead. So then we go all the way back to the beginning of this course when we talked about Lucretius and Seneca and so on and so forth. If dead is dead, what is there to be afraid of? The concern is, if dead is dead, then maybe all there is to live for is me. And that's not where Russell wants to leave it. Russell is a communist of a sort. Communist-ish, I'll say. So that'll come out here as well. But not yet. We're still in the Schopenhauerian pessimistic first paragraph here. All the labors of the ages, all the devotion, all the inspiration, all the noonday brightness of human genius are destined to extinction in the vast death of the solar system. Like, okay, Shakespeare might be great, Newton might be great, but you know what? Eventually, the sun is going to explode, become a supernova and all that stuff. The same thing that happens to every other star. And when that happens, whenever that is, even Shakespeare and Newton won't have mattered in the big scheme of everything. Because there won't be any of us around to appreciate it anymore. All the labors of the ages are destined to extinction. Yeah, it's pretty pessimistic. The whole temple of man's achievement must inevitably be buried beneath the debris of a universe, and ruins, all these things, if not quite beyond dispute, are so nearly certain that no philosophy which rejects them can hope to stand. And that's where he thinks religion is making its fatal flaw. It's trying to say, oh, no, the universe isn't dying, we're immortal, and our souls will live on, and even if the sun explodes, we'll still be... No. Science is not just making this stuff up, man. So, only within the scaffolding of these truths, only on the firm foundation of unyielding despair, can the soul's habitation henceforth be safely built. We have to start with the despair. We have to start with anguish and anxiety and despair and so forth that Sartre will talk about. We have to start with what Schopenhauer is talking about. We start there, but we don't end there. Right? We can do a deconstructive project, but we don't want to just have a parking lot full of rubble. We want to rebuild. Russell's here about the rebuilding. Like, okay, we got the despair. That's the ground. That's the beginning. Now what? Now what can we build out of that, given these truths of science? That yes, everything is going to be extinct at some point. How then, in such an alien and inhuman world, can so powerless a creature as man preserve his aspirations untarnished? We're powerless. Universe always wins. Nature always wins. If this really is about forces colliding and it's a power struggle between us and nature, guess what? Nature always wins. What is it Jeff Goldblum says in the first Jurassic Park movie? Nature will find a way. We are trying all of the time, let's call it what it is, to defeat death. Every new medicine, every new vaccine, every new this, every advancement in medicine is trying to postpone death. Hopefully to the point of getting rid of it entirely and defeating it. And guess what? We still die anyway. Nature always wins. That sounds pretty despairing. Russell says, yeah, but there's hope anyway, says Russell. In spite of death, the mark and the seal of parental control, man is yet free during his brief years to do what? To examine, to criticize, to know, and in imagination to create. While we're still here, before death gets us, we are free to do all of these things. And what are these things ultimately? Intellectual pursuits. Notice how similar these are to the lists that Descartes gives us, that Berkeley gives us, that Kant gives us. All of Western philosophy is about the intellect and about reason. What does all that stuff do? It examines, it criticizes, it knows, and it creates. That's what we're free to do. Nature will always win. Physics will defeat you if you try to run through a window on a 7th or 8th floor. Physics wins. But you can imagine many other possibilities, flying off, so on and so forth. You are free in your imagination, even though you are not free in the same way in the physical world. The physical world will win. But what makes this thing so great, what separates humanity from everything else, from all those other animals that Nietzsche wants to lump us in with, what separates us is our capacity to do all of these things like imagine and criticize and create and examine and think about and be aware of and appreciate. The savage, like ourselves, this is the third paragraph, 792, feels the oppression of his impotence before the powers of nature. But having in himself nothing he respects more than power, he's willing to prostrate himself before his gods without inquiring whether they are worthy of his worship. So think about ancient times and what was considered to be God or gods. They were things that couldn't be explained scientifically yet. And they were things of power. Lightning, fire, water, all of these things that ultimately we don't have much control over. Gods of fertility and so forth. We don't have much control over that. Now, we've come a long way, even just since Russell is writing this, right? Come a long way in controlling fire and controlling water and controlling genetics and controlling... But still, nature ultimately wins. And so the savages, and he would lump Nietzsche in with the savages here. Remember, Nietzsche is all about the will to power. We're not powerful enough to ever win. Says Russell, we're always going to lose. And so these savages then worship power, power, power. And it's all about striving for that power and trying to get more power and power, power. And Russell's like, that's a loser's game. That starts in despair and ends in despair. There's no hope there. Because There's always a bigger fish, right? You're striving for power. Everyone else is striving for power. You can go back to Thomas Hobbes and the Leviathan, who says, a life prior to the social contract of community and working together is short. It's brutish. It's violent. You're always looking over your shoulder, wondering who's going to try to attack you and take your stuff. That's the striving for power. George Orwell, power corrupts. Absolute power corrupts. Absolutely. Russell wants something better. He wants to preserve the dignity of man. And it's not through power, it's through something else. It's not through the Nietzsche route of God is dead. And remember too, for Nietzsche, God is dead and we have killed him, which then gives the power to us. We have the power. We had such power, we killed God. Isn't that amazing? That now makes us God, the most powerful. Something than which nothing greater can be thought, humanity itself, or something along those lines. That's not where Russell wants to go. Right? Feel the oppression, respects nothing more than power. But these gods, this God of power, and nothing but power, isn't worthy of worship. And so then he talks on the top of 793. That's the type of God you get in the Jewish story of Job. So he recounts that a little bit. Gradually, as morality grows bolder. Whoa. Now we've shifted from power to morality. Notice here again, we've got these two slightly at least different, and Russell thinks they're vastly different, understandings of great or greatness. Great in power and scope versus great in ethics, perfection, benevolence. Gradually, as morality grows bolder, the claim of the ideal world begins to be felt. The ideal, what could be, what is perfect versus what actually is, versus reality. The ideal versus the real, the moral versus the powerful. This ideal world of morality then also begins to be worshipped. If it's not to cease, it must be given to gods of another kind than those created by the savage. Right? A more civilized God. A God that rules not with an iron fist, not with all power and might, but one with all goodness, benevolence, love, all of these Christian concepts, just without the actual entity of the Christian God. Russell's not saying this thing actually exists. This is the ideal. The ideal is not the real. And he'll allude to Anselm here in just a little bit. Some, though they feel the demands of the ideal, will still consciously reject them, still urging that naked power is worthy of worship. Such is the attitude inculcated in God's answer to Job out of the whirlwind. The divine power and knowledge are paraded, but of the divine goodness there is no hint. And so the story of Job then is one where Job is this righteous fellow who everything's going well for him, plenty of sons and daughters, and they're all married, and family life is great, and the business is going well. He's got lots of livestock, and his wife loves him. He's got great friends, and everything's perfect for Job, and he loves God. So then Satan, the prosecutor, comes to God and says, whoa, hold on a sec here, God. Perhaps Job loves you and worships you and is righteous because you've been blessing him with all this awesome stuff. Let me put him to the test. Let me test him to see how faithful he really is. Let me take everything away from him. See if he still worships you then. And God, apparently having great confidence in Job, says, all right, I'll tell you what. You can do whatever you want to him, except don't take his life. Right? Like, keep him physically safe, but you can take whatever else you want. And so Satan then proceeds to take everything except his wife and a couple of friends. All his sons and daughters die, livestock dead. And this all happens like in the matter of moments. Job's life is forever changed. Everything's gone. And depending upon where in the text you are, Job does continue to worship God, or Job does begin to question, because his friends come to him and sit with him. They're like, whoa, Job, what'd you do to upset God, man? What happened? Everything was great. Now everything is awful. You must have really pissed him off. Job's like, I thought we were cool. I don't know what happened. I thought everything was good with me and God, but I don't know. So he begins to question God. Eventually, then God himself shows up in a whirlwind and says to Job, okay, Job, I hear you've got some questions for me, and we'll get to those in a minute. I'm paraphrasing, obviously. We'll get to those in a minute, but first let me ask you a couple questions. First of all, where were you when I created everything? Oh, right, you weren't around. Right. And you still see everything that goes on, like in the entire cosmos. Right. Oh no, that's me. That's me that sees everything. So since I was there in the beginning and created everything and still there sustaining everything, making sure everything is still running fairly smoothly, you know, laws of physics and whatnot, maybe whatever you got going on, Job, kind of not that important in the big scheme of things, huh? I'm pretty powerful, right? You, not so much. So maybe don't question me. That's the story Russell's alluding to here. God touts his power, but where's the love? Where's the goodness? Is that really an ethical response to Job's question? So, back to Russell then, this is still 793. Such also is the attitude of those who in our own day base their morality upon the struggle for survival. You know, someone like Nietzsche 20 years prior. Survival of the fittest, social Darwinism, where animals, like everything else, strong survive and pass on their genes and the weak just get left behind. The weak, typically? You know. All right. Maintaining that the survivors are necessarily the fittest, but others, not so content with an answer so repugnant to the moral sense, we have moral sensibilities within us, is some type of a sixth sense with regards to morality. Morality doesn't need to be figured out. It's not, and for more on this, take my ethics class, it's not some type of utilitarian calculus. It's not some type of categorical imperative. It's not a reason-based thing at all. We all know intuitively in our hearts or in our guts what the right thing to do is, and that moral sense realizes how repugnant this answer that God gives to Job is. Like, that's not the kind of God I want to worship. That's not the kind of God I want to follow. This quest for power. Repugnant to our moral sense. So those people who are not content with that answer will adopt a position which we've become accustomed to regard as especially religious, maintaining that in some hidden manner the world of fact is really harmonious with the world of ideals. Thus, man creates God. Man creates God. Man creates the concept of God. In this imagination thing that we have, this power to create, Russell's really saying, look, the greatest creation we've ever had is not in an art museum. The greatest creation we've ever had as mankind is the concept of God. The concept of God that is perfect and benevolent and loving and all of that. Man creates God, all-powerful and all good. And of course that conflict between all-powerful and all good is in many ways the foothold for most atheists. Wait. How can this God thing be both all-powerful and all good when there's a whole lot of bad stuff that still happens? Either he's not powerful enough to stop it, or he's not good enough to care enough to stop it. These two don't go together. All-powerful and all good, the mystic unity of what is and what should be. Powerful is what is, good is what should be. the real and the ideal. It's this union of the two in imagination. Is it actual? Does it come to fruition out there? No. No. Does it need to? Also, no. The ideal will never be the real, but the ideal gives all of us something to really strive for. That's pretty clever. I like how I did that. It gives us something to strive for, something to aim for, to be perfect, to be benevolent. Will any of us ever achieve it? No. Does that mean we should just give up and not try? Also, no. Does that mean we should just strive for power instead? No. The world of fact is not all good. In submitting our judgment to it, there's an element of slavishness from which our thoughts must be purged. For in all things it is well to exalt the dignity of man. How do we do that? By freeing him as far as possible from the tyranny of non-human power. The tyranny of power. That's what he thinks Nietzsche's big problem is. Nietzsche is submitted to the tyranny of power. And so we have this will to power, this will to be the best, this will to be great. Russell's like, whoa. First of all, it highlights power way too much. And frequently, in order to be powerful, you have to kind of not be quite so ethical. Skeletons in the closet and all of that. Again, for a lot more on that story, take my ethics class at some point. But furthermore, this tyranny of non-human power thing, it doesn't exalt our dignity. It brings us down to the level of mere animal, and we're beyond that. We're more civilized than that. Because we have this world of ideal that we can strive for. Kind of like Platonic forms, we can try to get there. Hegel's self-actualization, we can try to get there. Doesn't mean we actually will, but we can try. Shall we worship force, or shall we worship goodness? Shall our God exist and be evil, or shall he be recognized as the creation of our own conscience? Voltaire, who precedes Russell by quite some time, Voltaire says if God didn't exist, it would be necessary for us to create him. Again, for me, the same reasons. Something to adhere to, something to try to be like, some type of ideal to strive towards. Back to Russell. The worship of force to which Carlyle and Nietzsche, specifically calling Nietzsche out here by name. And the creed of militarism, so lumping all of these things together. And, I mean, let's also call it what it is, right? Russell's British, Nietzsche was Prussian, which is part Russia, part what became Germany. And there's a whole lot of bad blood there anyway, between the Brits and the Germans and the Brits and the Russians. So there's some of that at play here too, right? I mean, the British-German thing goes all the way back. I mean, forget about soccer. It goes at least as far back as Leibniz and Newton fighting about who invented calculus. You can check on that stuff on your own. Okay. Let us admit then, back to Russell, that in the world we know, there are many things that would be better otherwise. Yeah. Look around. I'm teaching from my basement. I'm not even teaching. I'm talking at a computer thing. Yeah, there's a whole lot of stuff that could be better than the way it actually is. And that the ideals to which we do and must adhere. Not just that we do, we must adhere to these ideals. Otherwise, there's no progress. There's no community. There's no togetherness. Because this tyranny of power is the individual trying to rise above. And Russell's like, whoa, we're so much better when we're together. I think I stole that from a commercial I saw recently. Let us preserve, okay. The ideals to which we do and must adhere are not realized in the realm of matter. Here's where Anselm is wrong. It's the second premise. Yes, God is the greatest thought, all good and all powerful. Something that we should all try to be like as much as possible. But that does not mean it actually exists in reality. There are many things that would be better otherwise that are not realized in the realm of matter. They don't actually exist. Let us preserve our respect for truth, for beauty, for the ideal of perfection, Plato's three forms, again, which life does not permit us to attain. Though none of these things meet with the approval of the unconscious universe. If power is bad as it seems to be, power corrupts. Let us reject it from our hearts. So Russell here is doing something very interesting. He keeps wanting to go back to this intellectual stuff, the very civilized, proper thing, right? Examine, criticize, imagination, create. But when it comes to the morality thing, it's about the heart, not the head. We have to get rid of this power thing from our heart. We have this moral sensibility from our heart. And this is a philosopher of mathematics doing this. Pretty impressive. In this, then, lies man's true freedom. In determination to worship only the God created by our own love of the good, to respect only the heaven which inspires the insight of our best moments. In action, in desire, we must submit perpetually to the tyranny of outside forces, but in thought, we are free. Free from our fellow man, free from the petty planet on which our bodies impotently crawl, free even while we live from the tyranny of death. There's true freedom. We're going to lose eventually, okay, fine. But until we've lost, we're free. We're free to examine, criticize, create, so on and so forth. We're free to worship these ideals that, again, we've created. We're free to work together as a community. And then this is, again, intentional. I mean, he's referring really to things like art, as Nietzsche did as well, though they have very different ideas as to what art is. It has something to do with the tragic, right? So we find this in 795. The beauty of tragedy, right? The tragic is part of it. But Nietzsche's complicated, right? Because he's got the shaman thing, which kind of brings everybody together. He's also got this individual will to power trying to rise above the Übermensch and so on and so forth. And when it comes to art, right, he's much more about the Dionysian, wine, women, and song, and all of that. Russell would be much more about Apollo, right? Russell would be much more about things like architecture and thinking about the art that you're creating, rather than just haphazardly throwing stuff together because you're in the mood or something along those lines. There should be a plan. There should be a pattern. That's what imagination is for. That's what creation is, kind of a thinking about and then creating out there. Not allowing the creation to overtake you. That's nonsense. That's nonsense, would say someone like Russell. That's civilized enough. Furthermore, Russell here is going to use the language of Christianity. Remember, he's not a Christian. He wrote a book about it. Right? It's interesting he wrote this first. Maybe that's why he had to write the Why I'm Not a Christian, because people read this and thought, wow, gee, he sounds really Christian. That's on purpose. He's using Christian language to indicate, look, you can have all the good stuff with Christianity without this nonsensical belief in the actual existence of a God somewhere. It's from freedom of our thoughts that spring the whole world of art and philosophy, freedom of thought from which springs art. So again, it's an intellectual thing. All right, at the bottom of 794, passive renunciation is not the whole of wisdom, for not by renunciation alone can we build a temple for the worship of our own ideals. Haunting foreshadowings of the temple appear in the realm of imagination, in music, in architecture, in the untroubled kingdom of reason, in the golden sunset magic of lyrics where beauty shines and glows, remote from the touch of sorrow, remote from the fear of change, remote from the failures and disenchantments of the world of fact. In the contemplation of these things, again, reason, the vision of heaven will shape itself in our hearts. Again, this heaven is not something that actually exists. It's an ideal that we should be striving for. We should all try to be good enough to get into this place called heaven, even though it's not real. Because otherwise, what are you left with? Russell thinks you're left with Nietzsche. Strive for power. It's all about me. Forget about the rest of you guys. I gotta be great, because it's the only way that my soul lives on is through name and legacy. There's a cavern of darkness This platonic light-dark imagery again. Talked about it before with the hero and the hero's journey. You have this cavern of darkness which has to be traversed before the temple can be entered. The gate of the cavern is despair, and its floor is paved with the gravestones of abandoned hopes. But out of that comes beauty. There's the tragedy. The beauty's got to come out of that. The beauty of tragedy does not make visible a quality which in more or less, this is 795, obvious shapes is present always and everywhere in life. The spectacle of death, the endurance of intolerable pain, the irrevocableness of a vanished past. There's a sacredness, an overpowering awe, a feeling of the vastness, the depth, the inexhaustible mystery of existence. I wonder, in light of the stay-at-home and everything else that's been going on the past almost 2 months now, a month and a half, 2 months, give or take, I wonder if we looked back at the first few weeks of the course about what the good life was and what the meaning of life was, if this current tragedy would change what our views are about that. Russell would say they would. But you got to have a little despair in order to have hope afterwards. And Cornel West kind of alludes to that as well in the video that I recommended. You got to have the despair first. You got to have the brokenness first. As the Cornell says, you got to have the stank and the funk of life. The love push that gets you out, right? The birth process itself. The raw funkiness of life. The tragic, the ugly. And learning to love it anyway, the beauty that comes out of that, the choosing to see the beautiful in that. And back to Russell. Moments of insight. That's what these instances of sorrow are. Moments of insight. So think Hegelian here. These are the moments of insight for the absolute. Russell's saying forget the absolute nonsense. It's a moment of insight for us. All of us. Individually and collectively. So it's still sort of two layers, like with Hegel. In these moments of insight, we lose all eagerness of temporary desire. Again, I'm thinking about current conditions. All struggling and striving for petty ends. All care for the little trivial things that to a superficial view make up the common life of day to day. We see surrounding the narrow raft, illuminated by the flickering light of human comradeship, the dark ocean on whose rolling waves we toss for a brief hour. From the great night without, a chill blast breaks in upon our refuge. All the loneliness and humanity amid hostile forces is concentrated upon the individual soul, which must struggle alone with what of courage it can command against the whole weight of a universe that cares nothing for its hopes and fears. Victory, then, in this struggle with the powers of darkness, in this true baptism into the glorious company of heroes, the true initiation to the overmastering beauty of human existence. It's only once you've been attacked that you can come out stronger. Russell would agree with Nietzsche on this point. That which doesn't kill you makes you stronger. And so, I mean, just this one sentence here is so chock full of Christian imagery. Victory in the struggle with the powers of darkness. If you've ever been to a funeral that has anything to do with Christianity, even remotely, you've probably heard the one psalm that's read, yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, powers of darkness, shadows of death. Sounds pretty similar to me. The true baptism, one of the sacred rites of Christianity, this baptism thing. And what do you get baptized into? You get baptized into the company of saints and heroes of the faith and so on and so forth, this community that you weren't a part of before. Now you have this different relationship with God. Look what Russell says. This is the true baptism into the glorious company of heroes. A community of fellow people who have overcome this stuff. The true initiation into the overmastering beauty of human existence. Just imagine, fast forward, I don't know how many months from now, but fast forward into the future, when this COVID-19 thing is behind us, when we can live life, whatever life is going to look like after this thing is over. think about how beautiful everything is going to seem again. Right? Those interactions that before you may have thought, man, I hate having to go to the bank and talk to the teller and so on and so forth. That's going to be like, whoa, there's a beauty here. It's like a person I can talk to and interact with and like touch them if I want to. That'd be probably kind of creepy, but you know what I mean, right? There's this interaction thing that is going to be much more beautiful after this whole quarantine stay-at-home stuff that before we took for granted, may have even been annoyed by. Food for thought. Last page, then again, a lot of Christian imagery here. Unite, and there's also some military stuff here too, which is interesting considering what I talked about last time with Nietzsche and the avant-garde, the out in front, which is a military term before it's an artistic term. United with his fellow men by the strongest of all ties. What is it? The tie of a common doom. The free man finds that a new vision is with him always, shedding over every daily task the light of love. And in Christianity, after this baptism thing happened, during this community thing, then everything is different. Now you're living for God, which means you're living for love. Loving everyone, loving your enemies, and loving your friends, and love, 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 love. It's a common doom that we all face. Let's call it death. In light of that, there's this new vision. Why? Because I've come through the despair thing, if I'm Russell. I've already built my philosophy upon the scaffolding of despair and the truths of science. And yes, it's all going to end, but before it does, we're free. So let's embrace that freedom. And not just embrace the freedom, but also help others. The life of man is a long march through the night, surrounded by invisible foes, tortured by weariness and pain, toward a goal that few can hope to reach and where none may tarry long. That's the reality of the situation. Death, she is a-coming for all of us. One by one as they march, our comrades vanish from our sight, seized by the silent orders of omnipotent death. Friends die. Families die. Pets die. Death, 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 death. Picking off everybody that I'm on this march with. Again, sounds pretty pessimistic. Russell thinks there's hope here. Maybe. Or maybe we're just stuck with Schopenhauer. Very brief is the time in which we can help them, in which their happiness or misery is decided. Our comrades aren't going to be here long. And so while they're here, why try to oppress them and smash them so that you can be the Ubermensch? Why not love them and try to help them as much as you can? Be it ours to shed sunshine on their path, to lighten their sorrows by the balm of sympathy, to give them the pure joy of a never-tiring affection, to strengthen failing courage, to instill faith in hours of despair. That's what we're here for. That's what community looks like. Heidegger's going to talk about Sorge, caring, and so on and so forth. Christianity is going to talk about, yokes and easing of burdens and all of that. Russell's got that here too. Balms, sympathy. Share people's sorrow so they don't have to do it alone. We're all actors in the same tragedy. Brief and powerless is man's life, but to preserve a mind free from wanton tyranny that rules his outward life. A lot of other notes here that don't really feel like getting into. Some weird Green Lantern references you don't need to worry about. It's interesting here. Russell thinks, look, I can have Christianity without the buying into this God entity out there. The ideal of God is enough, as long as it's all powerful and all good, and primarily the all good part. Interesting. That's why I say Russell resurrects the concept of God, sort of. He's on board with Anselm. That this something then which nothing greater can be thought must exist, otherwise there could be a greater thought. He's severing that. He's breaking that connection. With this common doom, we're all going through this thing together, does build bonds, unbreakable bonds. Right? Think about family bonds. Why do you have them? Because you've been through some stuff together. Think about your best friends. You've been through some stuff together. Think about the other communities that you're a member of. You've been through some stuff together and come through on the other side. You've helped each other out, so on and so forth. But Russell thinks in order to do that, you've got to have this ideal of goodness out there, this Platonic thing, which sort of comes with Christianity and sort of doesn't. Interesting. All right, bye.